Rios, and I'm going to show you how I wrote my survey. The first thing I did to start our survey was to come up with questions. So that meant brainstorming and also gathering questions from the class so we can have multiple questions to ask. A few of the questions we were able to ask was yes or no questions, indirect questions, and some of the things we couldn't do were no double questions because that would confuse the audience members. And also we weren't able to ask direct questions. An example of this would be asking if somebody was depressed. You wouldn't want to do that because it would deter the audience from answering truthfully. Here are some of my original questions that I submitted to our handout. So the first question was, in the past year, has social media affected your education or social life? This wasn't a good question because it was asking two things. It asked education and social life, so that may have confused some audience members. The second question was, in the past week, how many hours of sleep were lost due to staying up late on social media? This one was acceptable because it was straightforward and it was easy to answer. The third question was also very similar to the second, but instead it asked how many hours do you spend on social media rather than how many hours of sleep did you lose. When writing these questions, you have to write questions that are straightforward and not confusing to audience members so you can easily get your data. While also asking straightforward questions, you need to ask questions that are relative to the topic. If you're talking about mental health on teenagers, you're not going to ask about how their parents are affected by social media. That wouldn't help your data. Again, you cannot be too direct with these questions or else you're going to deter the audience from answering truthfully, affecting your data that you gathered. While also asking relative questions, you want to ask questions that can help you correlate your data to mental health on teenagers. You don't want to ask if they like using social media. You want to ask if they've been negatively affected by their use of social media, such as procrastination. For this survey, I used 8 simple and direct questions, which were all useful for gathering data. They are straightforward and relative to the topic. Not only that, but all these questions would be able to correlate to negative impacts that social media has on the mental health of teenagers. And with the responses from the survey, what I was able to do was to create an Excel sheet which showed the percentages of which students selected which answer. So from the data, we can see that most students are not heavily addicted, but most of them are also heavy users of social media. This means that most students are negatively affected because their use of social media is affecting their educational life and their social lives. After I gathered the data from the Excel sheets, what I did was I created pie graphs. This helps audience members looking at the data, it helps them visualize what the responses were. So by using pie graphs, you can help audience members. And here are some of the pie charts for all the questions. After gathering my data, what I found was that most college teenagers are not as irresponsible with social media because they are typically more responsible than those who would be in high school. While they might not be the most addicted to social media, they may not be at the best mental health because they constantly use social media. Another thing to take into mind is that this data may have differed if it was given to high school students rather than graduates because there's a generational gap between the use of social media. Younger generations are typically more tech savvy, so that may have been the reason why the older teenagers were more responsible with their usage of social media. Now you may have not noticed, but there is a little design on the right corner of all the presentation slides, and that was inspired from Aztec art design. It's not the same exact design, but it was heavily inspired by this. And that is how you make a survey, and that is how I made my survey. Thank you.